Welcome to Stitchery Stories, where textile artists share their life in fabric and thread, inspiration, techniques, disasters and delights. And I'm Susan Reeks, enthusiastic embroiderer and textile art dabbler who also loves podcasting. So take a break and enjoy our light-hearted chat, and please share with your friends so they can enjoy it too. Hello and welcome to Stitchery Stories, and welcome to our lovely guests. Today, yes, we have two. We are welcoming today Jennie Batchelor and Alison Larkin, and both of them have been previous guests, so I'll explain in a minute why they're back. But for now, hello Jennie, hello Alison.
Hello.
Hello.
Right. Now, and you'll have to forgive us as well. We've had a few technical problems, but we're here now, but we've got scrambled brains. I'm first of all going to read out their bios, and then I'm going to explain why they're here. Okay? So, Jennie Batchelor is Professor of 18th Century Studies at the University of Kent and the author of 5 books and many articles and book chapters. Jennie has co-hosted embroidery workshops and given various talks about embroidery, Jane Austen and Regency fashion for many events, including Lucy Worsley's BBC documentary Jane Austen Behind Closed Doors. Alison Larkin is a practicing embroiderer who lectures on various aspects of needlework. She regularly runs classes and workshops. She has won many awards and written for the journals Costume and the Journal of Dress History, as well as many other magazines. Now, Jennie and Alison, I say, are both previous guests. So if you want to go and find out more about them, then first place I'm going to point you to is previous episodes of Stitchery Stories. Alison was actually my first guest. She was that brave guinea pig who started it all off. And Jennie was about number 6 or 7, something along those lines. So go and listen to their individual episodes and find out more about them. But why are they here? So Jennie and Alison, would you like to share with us what you are working on and what has got you excited at the moment?
Well, we've been working on, and what we're excited about, is the book that we've just published together that came out with Pavilion on the 5th of March, World Book Day. And it's called Jane Austen Embroidery, Authentic Embroidery Projects for Modern Stitchers. And so we are not actively working on it because we've written the book, but we're working on telling everybody about how wonderful it is and how we want them all to read it so that they can be working on it and working with the material that's in it. So, I mean, if I can just begin by explaining parts of the contribution just in brief, which is that so it's a crossover book. So I had a conversation with someone in my local Waterstones the other day where they were selling it, and they were saying we don't know quite where to put it in a way, because it's a beautiful craft book. It's a beautiful craft book and Alison can explain more about that aspect of the book in a moment. But it's also a book about needlework in Jane Austen's time, about how embroidery patterns were circulated, how embroidery knowledge was passed on and acquired in the first place. So my contribution to it is various chapters about all those things, about history, about needlework, and about the magazine where we think a lot of the patterns were coming from at the time, which it's got beautiful illustrations and photographs in it. And Alison can tell you more about the craft side of the project.
Just going to say, the book itself is a very beautiful book. It really is lovely. And I have some images that we will be sharing as usual on stitcherystories.com and also on Instagram as well. So you can all get a bit of a sneak peek, and it's on Amazon as well, isn't it? In the usual everywhere places. So that was just as an aside. It is a lovely looking book. And so Alison, yes, do you want to just talk about your contribution to this lovely book?
Well, my side of it was doing the embroidery projects that are part of the book. So I'm sort of the craft side, where Jennie is the history side.
Right.
And they came from the patterns which were published at the time in a periodical called The Ladies' Magazine, or Entertaining Companion for the Fair Sex, which was published monthly from 1770 through to 1832, I think it was. And every month they published an embroidery pattern through to 1819. They stopped then for some reason. And these patterns are wonderful. They're beautiful patterns. But that's all there is. It's literally just the pattern. There's no instructions, there's no guidance, there's nothing about stitches or anything like that. So although they're lovely patterns, to go just from the patterns is a bit of a challenge. So what I was hoping to do is to make those patterns a bit more available by providing at least one possible way of stitching these beautiful patterns so that modern stitchers can work with them.
Now, I do remember when I was speaking with Jennie on your episode, your original episode, we were discussing then the excitement, weren't we, of finding these patterns in the kind of what's left or what's remaining of these magazines. They typically were bound into a book, weren't they, Jennie?
That's right. So as Alison says, the Ladies magazine, which was a phenomenally popular and successful magazine in its day. I mean, you have to just put it into context. We're talking about the time when a standard print run of a novel was 750 copies. So, Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility is printed in a standard run of that. The Ladies magazine, we don't know precisely because, editors lie about magazine circulation figures. They still do it today.
Still do.
But we think it was roughly, at the height of its popularity, there were about 10 to 15,000 copies going out a month. And of course, each copy could have had multiple readers, of course. So it's hugely popular. And they were bought monthly, as I say, and the embroidery patterns, along with all the other wonderful things that are in the magazine, fiction, biographies, history, letters, news, all that, as well as images and other things. They came in these lovely sort of 56-page installments each month, and then at the end of the year, what you'd do is you'd bundle up your 13 volumes because there was a supplement as well as 12 monthly issues. You'd take it to a bookbinder, they'd rip off the covers, take out adverts, that kind of thing, and then they'd bind them together. And of course, because the embroidery patterns were designed for use and designed to be used in ways that meant that they wouldn't necessarily survive being used, they were never supposed to be bound in. So when they've survived, they're accidents of history.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Now, that was, I thought in itself was a fascinating story. So now I've given you all a bit of a glimpse into that. After you've listened to this one, go off and listen to Jennie's and Alison's individual episodes. So that was quite fascinating. So then, Alison, you've brought these patterns to life again, haven't you?
That's what I've been trying to do. Yes, it's been a fascinating project, I must admit.
Right. And we'll get a bit more into the stitching side of things in a minute. But what I'd really like to drill into now is how you two met, because Alison, you're based up near me in East Yorkshire. Jennie, you're right down at the bottom of the country in Kent, aren't you? So how did you two meet, and how did the idea of this book, especially as you've explained, it's part history, part things to do with Jane Austen and stitching, and then actual, part instruction manual as well. How did that hybrid idea of a book, how did that come along as well? So who wants to go first with that one? Maybe Alison, do you want to tell that story?
Okay. Well, we actually met on Twitter originally. Because Jennie bought a copy of the Ladies magazine, which had some patterns in, photographed them and put the photographs out on Twitter. And I was interested in the notion of 18th century patterns because I love Georgian embroidery.
Yes.
And so I contacted Jennie and commented about these patterns and became part of the Ladies magazine Stitch Off, which was people all over the place using these patterns to do things with.
Right. So what I was just going to say was, so Jennie, so you're a professor of English. I've got that all wrong, but anyway. And so then it's quite interesting how you finished up organising this Stitch Off.
Yeah, well, so I've been working on the magazine that the patterns came from, the Ladies magazine. It's been unfinished business with me for a very long time. I started becoming interested in it a very long time ago when I did my PhD, which was on dress, in how dress is talked about essentially in 18th century literature of various kinds. And I knew I wanted to have a chapter of that project, which became my first book, was going to be on magazines, because that seemed an obvious place to find people talking about this.
Yeah.
And that was when I first found the magazine. And at that point, I was rooting through it on the British Library, and enjoying looking at it very much. But I then left it for a long time, but I came back to it in more recent years. But one of the great frustrations, I mean, I've always loved the magazine and I love many aspects of the magazine, but one of the great frustrations for me as somebody who'd first got interested in it because of its coverage of fashion was that there were all these patterns which I knew had been in the magazine because they're listed on the contents pages that are on the front cover of each issue. So I knew that they'd been there, but as you know, we've just been talking about, they hadn't, I had hardly seen any. I'd seen a couple, you know, in a few different locations around. And that was really frustrating to me because I had this sort of sense there was this wonderful archive and resource out there that we just didn't know anything about. And anyway, and then as Alison has explained, I because at the time I was, I got fully stuck back into the magazine many years after first looking at it, and I was running a research project on it actually to make it more accessible to more people by creating a kind of index for it, so that's open access and anyone can use. And it was through that somebody contacted me because they had a copy of the magazine, an original copy they wanted to sell, and it just so happened it had 6 embroidery patterns in it, and I nearly passed out. That's exciting. And so that's how that started. But in terms of how the book evolved, it was a little bit different because, as Alison said, we met on Twitter. So the Stitch Off was a wonderful thing. Lots of people all over the world actually made these objects based on the patterns that and interpreted them in very different ways based on the patterns I put on Twitter. It was really delightful. But then we had a wonderful exhibition that ran at Chawton House for 6 months. It all ended, and I was really thinking, there's so much more that should and could be done about this, and I was always trying to think about what would be the next sensible thing to do. And then Alison very kindly invited me to come and talk at a regional day for the Yorkshire and Alison, is it Yorkshire and Humber?
Yorkshire and the Humber, yes.
Regional day. And so I did a talk where I met you too, Sue.
Indeed.
Where I talked about the Stitch Off and sort of put the patterns in context, because the Jane Austen connection, I should just say, is because one of the, as I say, many things about the magazine that interest me is that it interested a lot of people at the time, including famous writers. So we know Charlotte Bronte read it, for instance. I mean, reading old copies that had belonged to her mother. And we also know that Jane Austen read the magazine. We don't have a letter where she says, today I read the ladies' magazine. And we don't have that many Jane Austen letters really anyway, compared to how many she probably wrote. But anyway, we know she read it because she nicked plot characters and names from there's a short story in it called The Shipwreck with a Brandon and a Willoughby in it, that 2 heroes from Sense and Sensibility. There's another story with a Mr. Knightley who marries an obscure orphan from a rural boarding school, which is just it's Emma. There's lots of other things going on. So we know and we also know that Jane Austen was an accomplished needlewoman herself. So all of these things were sort of floating about in my mind. Then I gave a talk that was wrestling with some of those ideas at the event that Alison very kindly invited me to. And Alison and I got talking after the event, not least because, as she's already said, one thing that so many people said about the patterns when I've talked about them when they were released for the Stitch Off, even really accomplished stitchers were often saying, but I couldn't do that. And I thought, well, why? Because you are really good at this stuff. And it was the lack of instructions. It was the fact that the magazine could just assume that people would know how to make them. Victorian magazines, when they publish patterns, generally have very, very prescriptive instructions actually about how to do it. And I suddenly thought, obviously Alison knows how to do it. Even I know how to do this, even though I'm nowhere near as good at any of this stuff as Alison. And so it was sort of thinking about Alison's wonderful expertise, thinking about all my sort of interests that were whirling around the magazine, and Alison said we should do a book.
Brilliant. One of those throwaway comments, no doubt. But
yes, a bit.
Here you are. So that must be 2 years ago? Or was it 3 years ago?
I think it's 3 years ago now. I think it was 2017.
It will. Because actually I started doing the podcast nearly 3 years ago. So it will have been. Yeah, wow. Crikey, 3 years. Anyway, so that I thought was just a brilliant story of how shared interests, connections, met on Twitter, etc., finished up in this really lovely book. Now, what I'm quite intrigued in there is, so you started off with these 6 designs that you found. So now I believe over time you've discovered other patterns that have survived. So given then, therefore, that you had somewhat of a selection ultimately, what inspired you to select and adapt the ones that you have chosen? What was the process there?
It was, to an extent, it was ideas from the patterns themselves, in that, that there's a wide range of patterns in the book, in the magazine.
Yeah.
Everything from round patterns for a cap crown, the crown of a lady's cap.
Yeah.
Corner patterns which were designed for an apron or a neck handkerchief. Little patterns that were designed for shoes. There's at least 7 or 8 different shapes of pattern that appear in these designs. So some of it was the pattern suggesting a shape.
Right.
So that, for example, one of the round patterns from a copy which I managed to buy myself from 1808. It was a cap crown, but it's become a round cushion.
Right. Yes.
By enlarging it a bit. One of the little shoe patterns, nobody really embroiders shoes much these days, but it became a mobile phone pouch.
Fabulous.
And that was the other angle to it, because I'd started off doing, various patterns which were sort of moderately historical. And a friend of mine said, well, hang on a minute, you need some modern stuff in there as well, because there are people out there who are into tech and into modern stuff. So I ended up making a tablet sleeve and a mobile phone pouch and things like that as well. So
in itself as well, that's quite fun, isn't it? So we've got these like old-fashioned patterns, and now we're making them into phone covers and tablets and things. Right.
Yeah.
Right, there's usually a ridiculous Sue story sneaked in here, and this is the time for the ridiculous Sue story. So, inspired by The Great Stitch Off, because I found out about it kind of pretty much when it had finished, as usual, and didn't have time to do very much. Anyway, it was in my head that I wanted to do something with these patterns, and I wanted to interpret them slightly differently because I'm insane. So, along comes the Embroiderers Guild, page 17 challenge from a number of years ago, and where you were supposed to pick some page out of a novel. So at the time I was reading these appalling biker novels. They're just sex and swearing, really, I suppose, all the way through. Anyway, it stops me thinking about technology. So I was reading these things, and so in my head I then finished up thinking, right, the tattoos. So I then promptly took 2 of those patterns and decided they were going to be tattoos. And so my piece was then entitled, for page 17, was entitled Bikers and Babes. I will put a picture on there. So I took this shoe pattern and turned it into black skulls and chains, and it was a man's like biker's shoulder tattoo. And then the ladies' one was, what did we work that out? I can't remember what we said it was now.
Gown pattern.
Gown pattern, yeah, a gown pattern. I made it into a red tattoo. So there we are. So I was there. So I've envisaged them as tattoos.
It's amazing what you can do with these patterns. That's half the fun. There's so much scope to do things with them.
Exactly.
And I think one of the things is that because so there's a couple of things to say, really. One is that, in the magazine itself, I mean, all the patterns had titles, but usually the titles are quite long-winded, and end with etc., and sometimes etc. So often you'd find a pattern. So a standard title would be something like a new and elegant pattern for a lady's gown, apron, shawl, etc., something like that. And so there's a sort of inbuilt flexibility even in the original patterns, that they could be reused in lots of different ways. And of course, without the instructions that we would now rely on, again, there's that sort of interpretive possibility, like they're open to thinking about in different ways. And certainly when we did the stitch off, I love the tattoo thing. We had also, all sorts of things emerged when I had no idea what people were going to do with the patterns when I released them, and they interpreted them in radically
fabulous
different ways. But I think the other thing is, talking about the technology example that Alison gave, one of the things we do in the book is we try to sort of catalogue in a way and describe the sort of range of patterns they had, which were, I guess you could sort of put them in three camps, really. You've got things for embroidered clothing, men and women's, and kids. Accessories like caps and veils and shoes and things. And then you have sort of household objects. And certainly, they did have patterns. In fact, I now own one for, a pocketbook, which is like a kind of diary come account book. And you think, well, it's not that much of a leap to go from embroidering a cover for that to embroidering an iPad case,
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, I really love this. And I was actually just going to say, when you look at the book, what I really liked was the fact that the history and the projects are woven together. And for example, have you made like I'm remembering this right, a pencil case or something? And then there's a quote there from Jane Austen about having a bad day with her pens or something like that. I really liked that, how you'd picked out quotes and points and mixed it in with the presentation of the projects. And I think that's what makes it really interesting to be. It's nice to read and nice to look at and nice to then think, I'm going to have a go with those patterns. So that was a brilliant set of ideas. Very much so.
Very lovely to hear.
Glad you like it, Sue.
I really do, yes. What techniques are involved in these patterns, and what sort of level of embroidery skill is required? So I'm sure we've got some people thinking, oh crikey, this all sounds really hard, or oh crikey, is this going to be too easy? So where's it pitched and what kind of techniques are involved, Alison?
Well, it's techniques of probably what we'd call these days surface embroidery or freestyle embroidery. So it's moving little bit beyond cross stitch. Mm-hmm. But having said that, the stitches that they used in the Georgian period are exactly the same as the ones we use today.
Yes.
It's all satin stitch, chain stitch, stem stitch, things like that.
There's so your classic kind of hand embroidery stitches, really.
Classic hand embroidery stuff.
Right.
And what I've tried to do in the patterns is to put together a range of different projects. So there are some which are beginners projects, for want of a better term. There's a sprig, which is quite a simple one. There's the pencil case that you mentioned is actually quite a nice little project with beads.
Yes.
And then it moves on to others like the hussif, which is a variation on a pocketbook, or the tablecloth, which are bigger projects.
Yes.
But none of it is terribly complicated stitching. It's satin stitch, chain stitch, stem stitch, things like that.
And it's also worth noting as well that you have included kind of background, haven't you, about materials that you need and information about frames and so forth.
Yes.
Because sometimes embroidery books are beautiful to look at, but again, you still don't really have much of a clue what to do. There's a level of knowledge assumed. So I thought that was nice as well, having those in. So
there's quite a long section on the different stitches, how to frame up, what kind of fabrics to use. I have used silk thread quite a lot in the book.
Right.
But there's a table at the back which gives you the conversion to the cotton threads as well. So if somebody wants to work in cottons, you can get the colours for DMC or Anchor from that.
Right. Oh, that's handy.
I went for silk because that's what they would have used in the Georgian period.
Right.
And I love working with silk anyway.
Well, see, I'm a chicken. I don't think I've used silk. So I think I would be going and going and getting the DMC.
Well, you should try silk. It's lovely stuff to work with. And the colours are absolutely stunning. They really are.
Okay, then I might try. The next insane tattoo inspired one I try then.
Okay. You'll get some lovely reds. There's some gorgeous scarlets out there.
Ooh, yes, Scarlet Woman.
Definitely.
Right, okay, so that's really good to know then. So there's something for everybody then, basically, isn't there?
I hope so, yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, so I'm guessing here, I could be totally wrong, but I'm guessing that this book is a current career high point for you both. So what interesting and exciting things have developed or happened while you've been working on this book? there's bound to have things happened. Do you want to share any of that with us?
Yeah, I guess for me, the book feels like the icing on a cake that I've been making in the background for a long time. For me, it absolutely does feel like a career high point. I honestly don't think there'll be another one like this for me. But for me, it's a long moment, because it started with the stitch off, which was a complete surprise.
Yeah.
To me, I never thought that just putting some patterns on Twitter would yield would yield the things it's done for me. And the things it's done for me, I mean, it's introduced me to people like Alison. Alison was one of the first people to respond to the patterns when I put them online. But there were many dozens of people who responded to that, some of whom I've now met in person, many of whom I communicate with on social media on a regular basis. I feel like I know them. I feel like they're my friends. They've taught me tons of stuff. So all of that has been just completely joyful and delightful. They've been very supportive of the book as well, which has been absolutely amazing. And I think also working with Alison has obviously been really terrific. And I think actually working together on this book has been amazing. So I've published things before on the academic line. Nobody can ever afford them, and they never ever look as pretty as this book does. I mean, like, this is just I can say that because I'm not responsible for its gorgeousness, but Pavilion who've published the UK edition, published beautiful books. I should say we worked with a fantastic illustrator, Polly Fern, who's done beautiful original illustrations for the book. There's lots of lovely photography, some of which is photographs of objects that have survived from the period, or visual satires and all sorts of things from the period. But we also worked with a lovely photographer called Penny Windsor, who photographed Alison's work and did the photography for the book. So the actual process of putting the book together was a complete eye-opener. I mean, I thought I knew a bit about putting books together, but it turned out I knew nothing. And I love learning all this. I've loved learning all this new stuff about how to put together a book like this, and working with really talented people.
That's been similar for me too. I mean, this is my first book, so I'm a complete rookie in this, but it's been absolutely fascinating to get involved in it. It's been an amazing experience for me. I have to admit, I've loved the whole thing. So I have to confess, I'm sort of sitting there thinking, well, there's a lot more patterns out there. What else can we do? I mean, I love Georgian embroidery anyway, because it was such an amazing period. So it strengthened my fascination, if you like, with Georgian embroidery. And there's some beautiful costume embroidery out there. So I'm just trying to develop that a bit further.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a little bit in miniature as well, which has been rather fun. That I get seriously anarchy in miniature stuff.
And when she's talking miniature, we're talking like really, really, really miniature. I just seriously, Alison, I don't know how you have the patience to even attempt some of the miniature things that you do, but yeah,
it's 1/12 scale doll's house stuff. But it's quite entertaining, I have to admit. But yes, it's a bit anarchy, and it takes ages.
Brilliant. I really, really love that. So what would you say then were the challenges involved in working as joint authors? How did that go? And also with the stitching?
Well, I mean, in many ways, it wasn't that challenging, in the sense that I mean, I've worked with other people before on books where we've sort of co-written things together, and that I've always really loved it. But it's always challenging because people write in different ways and have different writing habits and tics and that kind of thing. I can't do what Alison does, so she just had to do that. And then there was there was me and my books and my writing, and then there was lots of conversations that we had with each other about the book as a whole and how it was all going to fit together. So in some ways it wasn't that challenging, because we had our different sort of aspects of the book, and we were really invested in making them work together, I think. So it wasn't that challenging. I guess geographical distance was a bit of a challenge sometimes, and Alison had to do a fair bit more travelling than I did, I have to say. But I don't think it was that challenging particularly.
All right, that's interesting to know. Yeah.
Yes, I think it worked very well. I think because we had sort of defined sections, although we did have a lot of discussion along the way about which patterns and what the projects should be.
Yeah,
which was good. And we had some entertaining long Skype conversations and things like that about stuff. But no, I think it has worked very well. It as Jenny says, it's not been a challenge in a sense. It's all worked quite smoothly.
Oh, that's really brilliant to hear. And then the other thing really is normally we have exciting plans, don't we, for our book launches and activities. So do you want to just tell us what's going on with that?
It's all a little bit up in the air at the moment, unfortunately. We had plans. Jenny's been organising a conference because this year is the 250th anniversary of the first publication of the Ladies' Magazine.
Right.
And that was originally planned for April, but unfortunately Corona has got amongst it, the coronavirus. So it's postponed. It's not cancelled. We're aiming, I think, for September. Is that right, Jenny?
Fingers crossed, yes.
Yes, assuming that the virus allows us to. So we'll just have to see what happens. And quite what's going to happen about the American edition, I really don't know, because that's due out at the beginning of May. Right. So we'll just have to see what happens, I think, on that one.
Okay.
But the thing about viruses, as someone who is currently self-isolating with their family, is that you have to hunker down, and hunkering down is there are grim aspects, like buying toilet roll and that kind of thing. But the positive thing about hunkering down is that you need stuff to do so you don't lose your mind. And I would suggest that reading and embroidery are two things.
Oh yes, definitely.
Are very good. I mean, I sound like I'm making a joke, but obviously, like keeping our spirits up, keeping your mind engaged, keeping working at your mental health, because we're all going to need to be mentally resilient through this next few weeks and months. I'm certainly craving books and craving things to do and crafts to be engaged in and that kind of thing. So some of our grand plans for some of the events that we hope to put on at a later date, they're shelved, and it's right that they're shelved, but people can still read the book, they can look at the beautiful pictures, they can make the projects, they can hunker down with it if they want to, and some people actually, it's really lovely, some people have already sort of said to us that that's what they're doing.
Oh,
which is
lovely.
really,
yes, it's great. I mean, the one great thing about being an embroiderer in these circumstances is that you've always got something to do. There's always stuff out there, and there's 15 very nice projects in the book to play with.
So there we are.
No more for hours.
No more can anybody say, "Oh, I don't have time."
No, exactly.
No more excuses.
Right. Therefore, what is there a best way that people can kind of keep their eye out for what's going on, and when your events and your launch happens again, when all this madness has passed? Is there a certain place, social media, are you on there?
Best place to keep up with my stuff at the moment is my Facebook page, which is Alison Larkin Embroidery.
Brilliant.
And any new developments, anything going on, I'll be putting on there. I've also got an Instagram account, but I'm still getting the hang of that.
Right, we'll track you down on there.
It's Alison Larkin Stitcher, I think, is the...
Right, I'll put the links on the episode.
Yes.
And Jenny, you have a website?
Yes, so I have my own personal website, which is jennybatchelor.net, very imaginatively titled. But I'm also very active on social media, both under my own name and also under the Ladies Magazine Project.
Yes, and that's on Facebook and Twitter, isn't it?
Yeah, and been on Instagram a lot lately too as well. So we can provide the links. But yes, I'm sort of all over social media, yeah.
Fabulous. Right. Do you know what? This has been really great. And, well, as ever, I could spend all day talking to you, but, I have to draw the line. So thank you so much, both of you, for bringing this gorgeous book to the world and for taking the time to come and have a chat with me as well. Really, really enjoyed it. And everybody, just go and get that book. And if you're in ISO, then get going and get some stitches and start sharing your projects as well.
Yes, do please do post them on Facebook and things, because I'd love to see what people do with them.
Yeah,
it's been the most amazing project, the whole thing. It's been absolutely wonderful.
Brilliant.
Yes, please do try them.
Fab. Right. Well, I shall wish both of you a very good evening. And it's just been fab talking to you. And everybody go and follow Jenny and Alison and see what they're doing. And then you can catch up with the launch when all this craziness has gone. Okay. Thank you very much. Bye, both of you.
Bye, Sue. Thank you. Bye, Jenny.
That was great. Thanks, Sue. That was really true.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, then please join the Stitchery Stories fan club so you can get an email when a new episode is released. It's a quick and easy way of listening and of keeping up with any news and information around this podcast. Please visit stitcherystories.com. Of course, you can listen to Stitchery Stories on plenty of podcast apps at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify and plenty more besides. You can also ask your smart speaker to play Stitchery Stories podcast too. But wherever you listen, why not leave us a rating and a review to encourage other people to listen too? I very much appreciate you taking the time to do that for me. So that is the end of our Stitchery story for today. Keep stitching, keep smiling, and keep creating your very own Stitchery Stories.